Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. We are going to be talking about who can I trust with my money, how to vet potential borrowers and partners. And I think everybody is probably on the same page to realize just how challenging the last few years have been for us as real estate investors. There's a number of companies that have collapsed with private funds, with registered funds, and Christian and Erwin and I have had a number of conversations together about the importance of knowing how to do due diligence, the importance of knowing the right questions to ask and the right information to seek so that you can make the best possible decisions when it comes to investing your money. So that's really what we're going to dive into today. And just a little bit of Zoom etiquette, just in case after 3 years somebody isn't familiar with how webinars work, but you're going to see at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat panel, so you can open that up so you can see everyone's messages. Please make sure you click everyone, because otherwise it's only Erwin, Christian, and I who are going to see your message. So please make sure you click everyone and use the chat to comment, to share ideas, thoughts, to share information on what we have said. If you have specific questions, please use the Q&A tab, because those questions will tally at the end of the webinar. We can look through and we can answer those questions. They won't get lost in the chat, where if you ask questions in the chat, unfortunately, by the time we reach the end of the webinar in an hour and a half, in all likelihood, your questions will be lost. So use the Q&A tab at the bottom right here for your questions to ask the host and panelists at the end. Use the chat to interact and to comment and provide feedback. Our agenda for the webinar today, we're going to do a quick welcome and introductions. I'm going to share a few slides on the basics of vetting partners and deals. Then we'll move into the panel discussion. We'll be able to get additional information, ideas, and thoughts from Erwin and Christian. We'll have time at the end for questions, and then we will do a quick wrap up. So I am your host today. My name is Elizabeth Kelly. I've been a real estate investor for, it says more than 15 years, but I'm actually getting closer to 20. I specialize in buy, rent, and hold, rent to owns. I've done BRRRRs, flipping, a number of different strategies. I was fortunate enough to be an elite trainer for Rich Dad Canada for 8 years, and I'm approaching 5 years as an investment coach and mentor. I consider myself a business owner and an entrepreneur first and foremost. We are also joined by Christian Szpilfogel, who is one of my esteemed colleagues in the world of real estate. Christian has a background in tech and has to be one of the most authentic and conservative investors that I know. I love his ability to analyze risk and to be able to put in place plans and strategies to mitigate risk. He also has extremely high standards when he's looking at investment opportunities. So I felt like he would be a great addition to this webinar in terms of talking about, we don't spend much time, or as much time as we should, talking about risk. So I think Christian will provide tremendous clarity for us from that perspective. And we are also fortunate to be joined today by Erwin Szeto. And Erwin, of course, everybody knows Erwin in the world of real estate investing as well. Fantastic podcast that he hosts. And as he was telling us at the beginning, he's been doing it for approaching 7 years now, which is amazing. So Erwin is an absolute wealth of information. He looks at things from a lot of different perspectives. One of the things I love about Erwin too is that he's extremely conservative and he's extremely well-read and well-informed. So I thought Erwin would be a great addition to this particular webinar, because I love listening to how he looks at deals, how he decides how to move forward with different opportunities, and he sees an awful lot of them. So the first thing I want to clarify is talking about finding opportunities. So there's a number of different ways that we as real estate investors can come across opportunities. So right off the bat, I want to talk about the right ways and the wrong ways to find opportunities. And then I'll let Erwin and Christian jump in if they want to add something in around that. But I find these days a lot of people are finding opportunities by either posting or responding to ads online. And for those of you who might be newer to the world of real estate, in my world, this is a big no-no. I had a group called the Real Estate Investing Hub, and it was where people connected with other private lenders, and people could find joint venture partners. We know that the securities commissions from the various provinces are paying an awful lot of attention now to what's going on online. So I am not a fan of posting or responding to ads online, either looking for deals or looking for partners. I feel that you are taking a tremendous amount of risk into your business by doing that. So we can circle back to that in a minute. We'll just talk about the other ways to find opportunities, and then we'll talk about the 5 different categories that Christian and Erwin and I are going to talk about today. So another way to find opportunities is networking and connecting with the other investors. This is a thumbs up for me, because I believe it gives us the opportunity to connect with people on different levels as opposed to just seeing a proposal and moving forward. You can find deals and opportunities for private lending, typically only private lending, but occasionally I've seen mortgage brokers introduce people as prospective partners, but you can find them through a mortgage broker or an agent. My challenge with this is that people tend to rely on the mortgage broker or the agent to replace their own knowledge about how to do due diligence on the deal and on the borrower. And there are some fantastic mortgage brokers out there who are super ethical and have a ton of integrity. Unfortunately, there's some other mortgage professionals out there who are not as focused on doing what's best for their clients. And there might be a situation where, they get paid when they put a deal together. So they might be a little bit more concerned with kind of generating that next income, as opposed to saying, is this deal really something that is going to be super beneficial for my client? Is this going to help them advance and achieve their goals? Another way to find opportunities, of course, is through exempt market dealers. Typically, you need to be an accredited investor in order to do that. No matter how you find your deals and your opportunities, the deal source does not remove your obligation to know and understand the deals and the associated risks. So it doesn't matter whether someone comes to you and says, this is a great opportunity, whether someone goes, listen, I did all the vetting, I've looked at the borrower, they're fantastic. You need to know how to analyze your risk and the opportunity before you move forward. If you are not familiar with that, then I strongly encourage you. There's some great books out there now on the world of private lending and partnerships. There's a lot of great mentors and coaches who can support you as well. So the 5 different due diligence considerations we're going to talk about today will fall under these categories. So first, we'll talk about borrowers or partners, how to vet them. Then we're going to look at vetting the market and the location. We'll talk about the investment strategy, the property, and the exit plan. So that's really the deal itself. The terms and conditions and the security that's offered. And then part 5, which I'm sure Christian could cover an hour and a half on solely by himself, would be risk analysis. So let's just jump in here. So I'm going to give sort of an overview of some of the things that I recommend that people look for when they are analyzing opportunities. And then we'll kind of jump in, Christian and Erwin, and we'll get your thoughts in addition to sort of the standard stuff that goes out there. So one of the biggest things I noticed with a couple of the companies that had gone under was when people were asking for financial statements, both business and personal, the principals of the company would not provide it. So now one of my biggest red flags, one of the things I ask for when I'm doing private lending and vetting, is I want to see financial statements of the business. I want to make sure that that business is in a place where it can support payments to me, where it is not literally using my private lending money to fund their day-to-day business operations. I want to see, and this is courtesy of Erwin's wife, Cherry, I want to see a cash flow management strategy, because this is another area where a lot of businesses, a lot of lenders and investors have gone under, because each individual deal might look okay, but there have been issues with timing, with financing, with market changes that impact the cash flow management, and that's where companies have struggled. Obviously, credit score is something that we want to pay attention to. If someone's got a ton of unpaid credit cards and all kinds of stuff that's dragging their credit card down, that increases the likelihood I won't get paid. Reputation and references from other investors, former partners or lenders. Investment experience and track record. Do they have they done successful deals? Do they have proven problem solving skills? Have they been doing deals for longer than 5 minutes? Because that's pretty important. General business practices and level of knowledge. And then this is a big one too, that I think a lot of people don't know, is to look at the corporate and personal property title registry for registered general securities agreements or for judgments that have been found against the investors. So, Erwin, do you want to get us started? What would you like to add? What, in your experience, do people need to know or do in order to find the right people to be borrowers or to become partners with them?
I think you covered everything. We can end this
Okay, so
here,
we're
right?
done.
So we ever give everyone back their lunchtime.
Okay, perfect. So we'll end at 30 minutes and nobody has anything. Awesome. Christian?
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Actually, I do want to mention something. I'll use the example. So here's an actual example. Elizabeth and I were talking about last week or two, on the subject of New Brunswick, for example. New Brunswick comes up a lot. So when I have a question on New Brunswick, I brainstorm with myself who's been there for a long time, right? So then I think Elizabeth Kelly's been there a long time. If I want to learn anything about if I want to do some basic due diligence on New Brunswick, I will ask Elizabeth Kelly, right? Like Elizabeth, we had this actual conversation, right?
Yes,
And
we
then I
did.
asked you, has anyone asked you about New Brunswick investing? Do you remember your answer?
Yeah, no. I've
No.
been investing there since 2010. No.
How many units? How many properties, units, whatever you want to
We
quantify?
had a portfolio of 50.
Right?
50
So
units.
someone that's like, you're likely a good resource. And when I see all these New Brunswick investors, not one has reached out to you. And I think they all know you at least 1 or 2 degrees of separation. Right? So my point is reach, right? Find someone who has answers. Don't just jump in based on what your coach is saying, whatever. Like do some diligence outside of your community. Be willing to reach outside, right? Poor Christian gets all my Ottawa reference checks. No
He
one
gets mine
asked
too.
me. Yeah, no one gave Christian's name as to be the reference. I just asked Christian, poor Christian, every week. This guy okay? This guy okay? This guy. So
Yeah,
again,
Erwin's been bombarding me recently,
I'm
so
sorry, Christian.
it's all good.
Apologies. But, yes, like to Anne's point, like I don't know anyone with more property in New Brunswick than Elizabeth Kelly. So that's my first place I'm going to ask. Versus I see people rushing out there. I have no idea. I don't know anything about St. John, New Brunswick. So I personally have no idea what people are investing in. But if I want an opinion, I'd start with Elizabeth Kelly. Right.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, New Brunswick is a great example because it feels like everybody's going there like it's a gold rush. And I don't think we want to get into the specifics of New Brunswick, but what I'm seeing are people are saying, well, I see everybody else going there, so therefore it must be a good opportunity, so I'm going to go there. And it's like lemmings, right? Or sheep, everybody's just kind of flying down in that direction. And I don't think a lot of people are taking the time to do their own market research and diligence on that. So diligence covers a lot of different stuff, right? But whenever you're going to invest in a market, you've got to do some fundamental market research to understand, does it make sense? Are the trends there? And I agree with Erwin. Talk to somebody who's very good at doing market analysis or has been in that market for quite a while. Because some people have been in the market, but they don't really do good market research, right? So they can only tell you what's been happening in the past. Maybe something's happening now that's changing, right? Demographics could be changing, population trends could be changing, employment could be changing. So you do want to have somebody who knows how to do that market research as well as having the experience. So just don't follow people because everybody's going there. It may not be a good place. That's all.
Yeah. And I think that
Elizabeth Kelly.
actually
12 years of experience, 50 properties. She likely had some experiences to share.
Let me clarify, 50 units, not 50 properties.
50
units.
doors, whatever. Doors are all that matter. It doesn't matter if you make money or not. Doors is the KPI.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You could have 1 million doors and be negative cash flowing $100,000 a month. And you put that one number out there like it's a success. And to add to your point, Christian, not just knowing how to analyze the market, but matching your strategy to the market. So when I learned how to do rent to owns in 2008, I was super excited. And I went out and I was like, I was doing rent to owns in Ontario and they were going really well. And I was like, wow, we're in New Brunswick now. Why don't I start doing rent to owns out there? So I'm like, I can buy properties for $100,000, $125,000, $150,000. And I did 8 rent to owns out there within the space of 12 months. And I lost money on more than half of them because the market didn't appreciate the way it was supposed to, because the tenant down payments, in some cases, they were providing $5,000 or $7,000. So if they changed their mind, they just walked away. There wasn't the down payments weren't high enough for the commitment, and then the properties weren't appreciating. And I had to hold on to them for years because the market tanked. So I couldn't even get what I paid for the property. So I had to make the decision, do I take the Band-Aid off slowly and hold on to it, waiting for the market to come back? Or do I rip the Band-Aid off and just take a loss? So on just about all the properties, I decided to rip the Band-Aid off slowly. But yeah, New Brunswick, it's been a tough market, but you're absolutely right, Christian and Erwin. Nobody's reached out and gone, hey, you've been here for a long time. What's your experience been like? And then I'm not trying to tell people who've just bought properties, you made a bad decision. But I think it's important, coming back full circle, we need to understand the risk. And I believe the number one risk in New Brunswick is what happens with the market.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to a point you were making early on that I think needs to be emphasized, and it relates to the various provincial and federal securities commissions. The US has, of course, their own, the SEC, so they have that. Here in Canada, each of the provinces has their own provincial regulation. In Ontario, it's the OSC, the Ontario Securities Commission. It's one of these things, if you are raising money, if you're doing anything of that form, you do need to be compliant with OSC rules or the rules within the specific province. And none of us here, none of the three of us are lawyers. So I would do suggest that, well, it has to be said, right? So it's important for you to get advice from a securities lawyer before you start doing money raises, to make sure that you're in compliance with current laws. And the laws change regularly. They're not static. So they change as market conditions change, and you do need to do that. But at a very basic level, right, you're either putting an offer together and a proposal for investors that's either meeting securities regulations, or you fall in one of the very limited number of exemptions, for example, an accredited investor, or the third option is you're doing something illegal. I don't think there's any other options. Either it's a limited exemption, you're doing it properly, or you're doing something illegal. So to be sure for yourself, don't take advice from another business person or a lay person like myself, right? Go and check with the securities lawyer. There are plenty out there, and it will give you the appropriate advice for your specific situation and the kind of money raise that you're doing. Okay, and for that advice, they're not going to be terribly expensive, and it's fundamentally a way to protect yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian. And I think that you raised a couple of really good points there. First of all, you're absolutely right. We should have a disclaimer on this conversation saying that we are not accountants, we're not lawyers, we're not, accredited professionals. We are real estate investors with years of experience, and we're strictly sharing based on our experience. All of us, especially Erwin, knows the value of hiring the right professionals to be able to continue to guide and provide advice. I mean, Erwin married the best accountant out there, so.
That was part of his due diligence process.
Yeah. Okay, so Barbara said, could you expand on the last point in your last slide? So I'm getting there's a few people here who are asking to see the slides again. I guess I was a little bit quick in how I went through it. But if it's helpful for you guys, I don't mind, take a minute, grab a screenshot if you want to. But I'm happy to share the slides afterwards if this will be something that's beneficial. I just wanted to sort of provide a entry-level foundation and then give us the opportunity to be able to dive a little bit deeper. Anything else that you guys have to say? I mean, I think one of the things that I've noticed in the world of real estate investing is that when people have a bad experience, they're afraid to talk about it. So if people are seeing red flags, they're afraid to say, hey, you know what? I lent money to this person, or I partnered with this person. There's a couple of situations I know right now with people who are actively advertising on social media. And I know some things that are going on in the background, and people, the partners who are impacted, the borrowers who are impacted, they're not saying anything. And the challenge with that is it enables people who are in financial distress to continue going and raising capital from other people because we haven't done our proper due diligence. We haven't looked at, what is going on in the personal situation of these people, or, where is their business at? And I feel like if we sort of implemented all of these different scanning practices into our core business model, I feel like we'd be in a much better place. Like, we should be talking about who is doing amazing things. And one of the mistakes that we make is thinking that because we become a real estate investor, we know everything. What we need to be focusing more on, I believe, in addition to learning how to do a particular strategy, we should be learning how to run a business. Because there's an awful lot of us who get into real estate investing and we don't, like, my degree is kinesiology. I did not learn in school how to run a business. I have literally asked a million questions, read, talked to people, made mistakes. And as a result of that, like, I spend a lot of time talking to Christian about how businesses are run. What are the underlying principles, how to plan? Like, this cash flow management strategy is absolutely critical. If someone doesn't know how to manage their cash flow, it doesn't matter, how great their individual deals are, they're not going to be able to execute on them. They're not going to be able to get to the finish line to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we kind of have to dig down to some of these bullet points, right, in terms of what you're actually looking for. And let's talk cash flow for a minute. I mean, there's the cash flow associated with a particular business case that you're running for a particular project. There's also the cash flow for the general operations of the business. And that effectively serves as a form of a reserve, if you will, that if the business case, the primary business case has trouble, do they have the ability to deal with that? And you're absolutely right. Real estate investing is a business. Okay, it might be a side hustle, but it's still a business, right? For myself, and for Elizabeth, investing is our primary business. So that's what we do every day. So we have to have good cash flow management in that, because we've got staff to pay. And we want to make sure that even in an environment where interest rates are rising, as they have been this year, and I just want to say, what we're experiencing today, I kind of view as normal. The last 10 years was abnormal. So when I take a look at what's happening with interest rates today, I'm just saying, okay, we're kind of back to normal, and I'm managing my operations accordingly. So over the last 10 years or so, with all of the low cost of capital, I was just treating that as upside, right, and helping to build the cash reserves. So that's part of how I've managed that risk. But when we get back to the cash flow piece, because I've managed it in that way, even though I'm doing a bunch of refinances right now, will it have a hit on my cash flow? Sure. But we're cash flow we're cash flow solid. And we've also managed that kind of buffer with anticipation that this could happen. So that's a key piece. And, and then if we want to, we take a look at something like financial statements that you're talking about and digging down. I mean, the income statement is certainly important, right? But the balance sheet is critical. So understanding what people have in terms of debt and asset, and how it relates to other elements in here. So for example, and I'll get back to debt and asset in a second, but if we take a look at the properties that they have registered, right? So what's happening on title on the various properties? Does it match what they're claiming on their balance sheet and what properties that they actually have. Does their not just credit score, but the credit report, as you dig into it and you see the various trade lines that are there, does it match what you're seeing from the financial statements and from the title registry? All these things have to mesh. And for most of you, you've all dealt with lenders at this point, whether it's just for a personal home or whether it's for an investment opportunity. And especially if you're doing commercial investing, the amount of due diligence that the lender puts on us, right, should be an indication of the level of due diligence you need to put on people who are borrowing your money. So, or you're potentially partnering with. So understand not just that, oh, look at that, their debt to asset ratio is relatively low. That's fine. That's a good indication of things that are good. You don't want to see a debt to asset ratio that's at 100%, right, or over 100%. They're clearly over leveraged. And one little bump in the economy like happened this year will tip them over the edge. But if you take a look at that in combination with the credit report, you'll be able to see what's actually there. And I do want to just add one little thing, Elizabeth. Some of the high profile issues that we've seen publicly over this past year relate right back to what you were talking about with cash flow management strategy. The failures that I've seen when I've dug into it really just came down to the fact that they were primarily not managing their operational cash flows properly. And in some cases, we're using new debt to finance their operations, which is a definite no-no.
Basically a Ponzi.
That's the definition, yeah.
And just to add to Christian's point about operational cash flow, I think it starts with operations. All these very large public business failures, growing too fast. Like my own strategy has always been, so understand my background is my ex-wife had a renovation business. So even though we had our own renovation business, we only have so many employees to use on a renovation project. So we only did one property at a time. These large public failures, they have many properties, right? Like this one, I was reviewing some documents on one recent bankruptcy. They failed last year before the market even turned. So again, it was an operational issue of too fast, over leveraged. I would say the first problem was they bit off way more than they could chew, and they were inexperienced investors doing way too many renovations.
Yeah, and I think with the skyrocketing cost of renovations and labor, there's a lot of investors who have done very well because of the market over the last kind of decade. And to your point, Christian, like we should, as investors, we should have been running numbers at 5, 6, 7% interest rates ages ago, because we knew that they weren't going to stay as artificially low as they were. We didn't necessarily foresee that they were going to increase as quickly, but I think, you know, when you have the experience behind you, the market should be a bonus and not relying on it to be able to sell for maximum dollar, and that's where the majority of our returns come from.
So you know what's missing from this page, Elizabeth?
No, there's nothing missing. I'm perfect. Come on, Christian.
Christian's cell phone number is missing.
You said it. Risk management plan. What's their risk management plan?
The risk management plan is section 5. So we're going to get there, I promise.
Okay. So,
yeah.
But you do want to make sure that whoever you're investing with does have a risk management plan. So as we all know, projects do not go perfectly, right? I don't think I've ever had a project go precisely to plan, right? No. I can tell from Erwin's shaking of his head that he might have had 1 or 2 that didn't go right. Huh?
Nothing's gone perfect. Nothing has ever gone perfect.
So the question is, how do you manage that, right? And if you're getting to that, Elizabeth, I'll keep my powder dry on that one. But you do want to take a look at the borrower's partners, even in your own operations, in your own deals. You'll find it easier to sleep at night if you just understand your risk management plan.
Absolutely. Erwin, did you have something you wanted to add before we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, so Christian's cell phone number is missing from here. So if anyone wants to send me $100, I'll release Christian's cell phone number to you.
Oh dear.
That's awesome.
I do want to. I see a lot of the questions are around like background checking people.
Yeah.
Are we going to get? Are we getting to that, or should I talk to that now, Elizabeth?
You go ahead and talk now,
Oh.
because we'll move on to other areas of the assessment when we leave this slide.
Okay. So it's similar to how if I wanted to do diligence on New Brunswick, I'd call Elizabeth Kelly first. So no different than how I invest. If I want to invest passively, I search for the best of the best. I don't wait for an email from an agent or see you on social media to determine what I think is a good investment. I'll ask around, what is the best investment, right? And then I have my own criteria. So I'm not doing diligence on individuals. I'm not doing diligence on like 10, 15 individuals. I want to find who's the best of the best and the best, right? That way I can do a lot less due diligence that way. There's less people to have to do diligence on, and I save a lot of time.
Yeah.
And hopefully I lose less money.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I was talking to someone the other day. They had booked a discovery call with me, and they were in the process of interviewing 6 coaches. And in my head, I went, you're not going to have the clarity at the end of 6 conversations to compare 6 different people. You're better off doing your legwork and then interviewing 2 or 3 and making your decision. But trying to decide between 6 with multiple conversations over a period of 2 weeks, it's going to be hard to compare apples to apples. And you need to be super clear on what it is you're looking for in order to choose who the best person is for you to work with, for sure. I do want to clarify as well. How do you guys feel about prom notes versus secured lending? Prom notes, are they a good thing, Christian?
Under very specific circumstances, they can be a good tool, right? But again, and it's kind of a point I was going to make. This slide, what we're doing with due diligence isn't to say necessarily just yes or no. You're doing a risk assessment, right, on the situation. And then there's 2 things that can come out of a risk assessment, right? One is a decision as to whether to proceed, and the other is under what terms you would want to proceed if you choose to proceed. And sometimes that risk assessment is basically telling you that, yeah, I would proceed, but my compensation, right, has to be in proportion for the risk that I'm taking on. So, the prom note discussion is actually a good segue, because if you take a look at a prom note, by definition, there's no security really, right? You might be able to get a personal guarantee, but then you've got to go back and do your due diligence on the personal guarantee as well. If you're going to do a prom note, and I have done some, right, in terms of loaning money out specifically, and I'll take a very close look at the borrower, the timeline, for the exit. So what do they need this money? Sometimes it was just to get a permit. They needed money over a weekend to get something done. So I take a look at the situation, the credibility of the borrower, the credibility of the project and the reason for use of the money, the exit strategy, the contingencies around the exit strategy. And depending on that level of risk, I'll consider what my compensation should be in the context of probability of failure, right? So sometimes I won't say no, I'll say yes, but my compensation may be much higher than it would otherwise be if I see a material risk. And I think 1 in 4 of these might go bad. I'll set my, whatever form of compensation is there appropriate to the fact that 1 in 4 might go bad. So I don't say that prom notes are bad, but there's a definite overutilization of prom notes or promissory notes and unsecured borrowing in situations where people are really just going on a hope and a prayer that they're going to get paid back. So, and at the end of the day, if the personal guarantee doesn't really have any assets of worth and the prom note is fundamentally putting someone in an over leveraged position, that prom note isn't even worth the money or the value of the paper that it's written on, right? That paper was worth more. So
yeah, absolutely. And the thing about prom notes is the same equity can be promised to multiple people. So one of my clients had sent me a message before this webinar, and she said, what do you do about people who are advertising the same deal on different social media platforms and going, hey, message me? She goes, there's nothing stopping someone from borrowing 100,000 from you and 100,000 from you and 100,000 from you, all from different platforms, but they're promising you the same $100,000 in equity if they don't pay.
Yeah, exactly right. And so all that stuff has to be, you have to ask for disclosures around those kinds of things. You have to put it into your lending agreements. And I've seen a lot of prom notes where it's just person to person, no legal advice is involved at all. One-page prom notes I've seen, and I'm just shocked by, right? So you do want to have a proper lawyer involved in drafting any form of loan agreement. And it's just, quite frankly, for your protection, both sides of protection. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Erwin, what have you got to add on prom notes? Because I know you've gone down that rabbit hole before. Cherry and I have had some good conversations about it.
For any sort of private lend, for my own personal situation, the worst case scenario is too much for me. So that's why I've always avoided it. Like, I'm not liquid enough to have to take over a property. It's not, to me, I'm way too worried and anxious to lend that kind of money to anyone, because the amount of diligence that I would do on a lend is similar to owning a property. So why would I not just own the property and have all the upside to myself?
Yeah. And that's, I like that you have that position. I have a different position. I'm perfectly happy to do private lending, but I only do registered. I'm not a big fan of, well, I shouldn't say only. I don't like doing prom note lending. Like, I need to have a really good understanding of the person's business model to be reasonably confident that I'm going to get the money back if I'm doing a private lend.
Oh, and also, can I just go back on that coaching thing that Elizabeth, that you mentioned, that you had someone interviewing 6 coaches?
Yeah.
Here's a really easy question to ask a coach. Who is your coach? Thank you very much. And then I'll go contact them. And then I'll ask that coach, who is your coach? And if they have a coach, I'll go ask them. I've now limited my interviews to like 2, right?
Yeah.
And if their answer is no coach, that's not someone I want to work with. Oh, I'm self-taught. Oh, really? Thank you very much for letting me know. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
makes
not
for a short conversation for sure. At the end of the day, like with anybody who's teaching you, you do need to look closely at who the organization is, who the person is that's delivering the content. On that side of it, you want to make sure that these people have done significant investments themselves. Are they doing this full time? Right? And specifically the investment side. Are they full-time investors in the subject you're most interested in? So for example, Elizabeth has literally done over 100 rent-to-owns. I don't know the exact number, but she's done tons of them. So if you want an expert in that field, then Elizabeth would be a natural person to do it. But if you've got someone who has done maybe 2 or 3 rent-to-owns, right, and they've also got their regular day job, and clearly haven't made the leap, you'd have to question the credibility associated with that. Also, if they are, making primarily all of their money from coaching and not necessarily a very active investor, I think that's something to also think very carefully about as to whether that's the right person or not. I'm not saying that they aren't. There may be some people that are just really very good at teaching, that understand the fundamentals, and I think they can certainly add value. But when things get really tough and you're dealing with really hard situations, there is no substitute for practical experience. None. So theory doesn't fly.
And I think part of what this comes down to as well is integrity. And I think, Erwin, you've been sort of, in conversations with some of the principals in one of the more recent companies that collapsed. And there's been remarkable integrity shown by some and a complete lack of integrity shown on another. So my rent-to-owns in New Brunswick that didn't turn out the way that I intended, I had a decision to make. Did I want to go back to my partner and say, hey, you know what? Sorry about your luck. My disclosure on the bottom says that you could lose money if you invest in real estate. I knew that it wouldn't have mattered what my disclosure said. I knew that she was investing because of who I was. So I had a decision to make, and I went back to my husband, who was my business partner in some of my other investments, and I said, I'm not willing to have this investor lose money. I want to make them whole. And I'm willing to take money out of, another company, out of other deals that we're doing, and put it in to make her whole. That's always an option that we have, right? We should have the personal resources to be able to cover shortfalls should we so choose. And that doesn't necessarily work for everyone. Some people aren't in the financial situation to be able to do it. But the damage to my reputation, to my integrity, and my ability to sleep at night wasn't worth it to go back to the investor and say, sorry, you're out of luck.
Yeah, integrity is so important in this business. I recall a gentleman who had started a renovation company locally here in Ottawa to help investors, suite units, etc. And he got into some trouble because the primary contractor that he had involved was a fraudster. And he hadn't done the proper diligence on that side of it to vet the main contractor, the GC. And a lot of people ended up losing money. What this gentleman did, right, the owner of the renovation company ended up doing in the end, is he made sure everybody was whole. And he sold some of his own properties to make sure that he got money back to the people who had lost money in the venture that he had started. So that adds an awful lot of credibility to a person to say their priority is to make sure that their investors are kept whole. So, yeah. And not every situation is like that, and not every situation necessarily needs to be like that, right? Sometimes you're taking on a higher risk and you have to accept responsibility. But at the same time, you are looking for a partner that you can trust and that you believe you've assessed the risk of properly.
Absolutely. Erwin, did you have anything to add before we jump to the next slide?
To speak as an overall statement, there's so many things to invest in. I just need one red flag from anyone to take them off my list, right? They may be perfectly good people, their investments may be perfectly good, but because there's so many good investments out there, just be picky, be extremely picky.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. I love that.
Like,
okay, next slide. So one of the things that is, there's a lot of these kind of pieces that are really about buffering the risk. So whenever I look at an opportunity, whether it's taking on a partnership or whether it's doing private lending, I'm always looking at worst case scenario. So if there's a situation where, my partner or my borrower disappears, I want to make sure that the market, the property, the strategy, all of these are viable options, and that they're not just, kind of pie in the sky. Oh, I think the renovations are going to cost 60 and they're 120 and now my money's gone. So one of the key pieces to look at is the market. So I want to make sure if I take this property back over because the deal doesn't go as planned, is this a market where I actually want to own property? So is this a market that's growing? What are the employment options? I want to look at the historical growth and appreciation rates, because in my experience, historical growth in comparison to other markets is generally a pretty good predictor. Unless a major employer comes in, that growth is usually fairly stable. What is the future planning by the municipality? What are they anticipating their population is going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? What are the infrastructures that they have in place? Are there additions coming to transportation? Maybe they're expanding roads. Maybe they're bringing in a new transit system, whatever it is. I look at the tenant or the buyer profile, depending on my investment strategy, and their common behavior. And then, do I have a power team of people in place who can support me? So if I suddenly end up with a partly finished flip in a market that's 6 hours away from me, do I know the people who can help me finish that project and then help me get it listed and help me get it sold? Those are some of my key considerations. Erwin, do you want to start talking about, like, when you're looking at a deal, what factors do you look at in the market? And you're a realtor too, so you have access to tremendous amounts of information.
Yes, I'm also licensed. Being a realtor, I'm licensed in real estate. So do not look to me on how to our marketing standards, because again, I'm licensed in real estate. I have a license. I can talk. I'm allowed to market and sell properties, right? So this is a warning out there. And also, I don't raise capital, so I just want to put that out there. I'm not interested in OPM. I have enough on my plate that I don't like. I know Christian's the same. You don't raise any capital. Elizabeth, looks like you're just looking to deploy capital. Like none of us here are raising capital. I actually don't want anyone's capital. I'd much rather help people get into properties themselves. But again, it's difficult. Again, some basics is I believe that everyone should invest themselves in what they control. Right, all my properties either in my name or my corporation's name that my wife and I have 100% control over. Next person in line is the bank. I still always believe that is the right thing to do. But there's some people who are really bad with their money. So understand those things. But again, I still think everyone should invest in themselves, invest in what you control. Like trust yourselves. I don't know how else to say it.
No, I agree with that. Kristen?
Yeah, so I'm glad you talked about market. We kind of alluded to this earlier, and market research is absolutely critical. The data is all there.
It's all public. Yeah,
it's easy to find. And I think, there's a model that RAIN uses, the Real Estate Investment Network, that I like very much, which talks about leading indicators versus trailing indicators. And when you're talking about, because there's different pieces that Elizabeth talked about, but when we're talking about appreciation, I tend to look at it as upside in the investment model, but I do look at it in terms of the foundations. So the economic foundations of an area that you're going to be investing in is absolutely critical. So if you are, if you're looking at that piece, there's all kinds of data that exists. So if you take a look at StatsCan, CMHC, it's providing you with all of that information. So let's take a look at that RAIN model again. A leading indicator would be something like GDP growth. Very hard to find, but you can find it if you're looking closely. Next one would be employment growth. All right, and employment growth, as we saw, for example, on Ottawa, we saw that about 70,000 new jobs got added in Ottawa in 2019. Now, they can't be all filled right away, and it takes time to get that filled. And because it takes time, vacancy rate slowly starts going down, and then that causes demand overall for rental housing. Rents go up, the value of properties go up because, the cap rates are getting compressed because of it. So there's a lot of good things that you want to look at on the economics underneath the leading indicators to make sure that the footings are solid. You want to look at economic diversity in a particular area as well. So, people ask me, Christian, why do you like Ottawa so much to invest in? And it's just very simple. We've got two major demographics of employers within Ottawa, whereas most cities have maybe one or one and a bit. And what I mean by the major demographics, we've got a large public sector in Ottawa, right? Should come as no surprise. We've got a large private sector as well. And in the private sector, it's also fairly diverse in the kinds of businesses and the types of economies that it is. All of that stuff is available on StatsCan. You don't have to guess at it. You don't necessarily have to read a municipal report, although the municipal reports are often helpful. You can literally find the number of employees by sector within a particular, what's called a census metropolitan area, or CMA. And that's any town, if you will, that's got at least 10,000 people in it. So you can take a look at that and see the diversity of that economy. So you constantly have to look under the hood, see what the fundamentals look like. You mentioned transportation, right? So if you see a town where a divided highway just went out to, first of all, you should have anticipated it because you would have looked at it at the provincial plan and see that they were intending to do that. So clearly there's a reason they're doing that, right? But when it's happening, the community that's at the end of that highway doesn't necessarily see a response right away. So I'll give you an example. Highway 7 from Ottawa to Carleton Place has been in place for about 6 or 7 years. And you knew something was going to happen. You also knew that Carleton Place was at a crossroads if you wanted to go to Smiths Falls, Perth, Allemont, etc. So, or even going further west towards Toronto. So there was lots of reasons for that market to appreciate, but it took a little while, right? So you knew the fundamentals were there, you were investing in it, and those fundamentals sometimes don't kick in until quite a ways later. So, but that's okay. What you're really looking for is the foundations of the market. Are they solid? You don't want in one industry town like Smiths Falls, for example. Smiths Falls lost its Hershey factory, right? And the vacancy rate and the unemployment rate skyrocketed. Now Canopy Growth is in there, and Canopy Growth is a major employer, right? But it's still essentially a one industry town. If Canopy decided all of a sudden to move to just say Southern Ontario or retrench, say, into Mexico, right, then Smiths Falls would be done, right, again. So you do want to do your diligence on the market and look at all of this stuff. And like I said, most of the data is there. Elizabeth mentioned the community plans. It might be the town, it might be the county, or it might be the city. You want to make sure, take a look, like I said, StatsCan is a wealth of information. It really is. And CMHC then takes StatsCan data and puts more data around it, such as the vacancy rates, right? And they publish that. They do a survey every October. So the data is there. Take a look at it, really, dig in.
Yep, I love it. I love it. How about you, Erwin? What do you have, like a go-to tool or somewhere where you you're just such a wealth of information? Like, I feel like you must look at hundreds of, different articles and places for your information before you invest.
Yeah, I consume a ton. I'm not as smart as Christian, so I don't like taking data directly from StatsCan or CMHC. So I pay for my news. So I prefer when strong technical journalists interpret data for me, or even like I'll put it in the chat. Like Dr. Mike Moffat is a wonderful resource. He's on Twitter, so he's actually paid by our governments to prepare reports. He's a professor at the same business school that I went to. He's actually going to come on my show. But anyways, again, he's impartial. He doesn't care if you or I own real estate. He's a paid researcher, and he shares a lot of it on his Twitter. So again, you're getting it directly from the source. So I like getting my information from paid sources, and I like to verify as well to hear it directly from the horse's mouth. So yeah, I'm all over the place. So I spend a lot of time on this stuff.
So my only caution with that, Erwin, and I think it is a valuable thing that you're talking about. We always have to make sure of what someone who's doing an economic analysis, what their agenda is, because they have agendas. And it can be subtle. So for example, the economists within the banks, right, when they're put out a report and they're speaking to certain things, they are part of that business. So they have to give a perspective that is largely favorable to their business as a bank. They're not going to say something that's going to undermine the credibility of the bank or the industry that could affect the bank. So we also always have to put a little bit of a filter to understand the perspective that someone's coming from. But aside from that, I completely agree with you, and I do try and pick up some of that information as well. But you know me, I love primary analysis, so I'm a sucker for it.
To Christian's point, I look at the entire spectrum. I listen to bears, complete bears as well. Yeah. If everyone wants to see a really rosy economic outlook, always read what Treb's economist is putting out. So again, from having consumed this information for so long, I know where they all fit in terms of spectrum. So generally, I find the Treb economist usually the most optimistic, and then typically of the mainstream, CMHC is usually the least optimistic, sometimes even bearish, incorrect, and often they've been incorrect on how bearish things are or how low things go. But yes, again, broad spectrum. I do tune into what some of the bears say. But the funny thing about bears is they're having their day in the sun right now. They've been wrong for the last 12 years, but they're right now.
What's that phrase about a clock? Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah, like one of my favorite bears on Twitter. Like he followed through on his own thought, on his own bearishness. He sold his home. He's been renting for the last 12 years. And now he's finally right. So, Elizabeth, Christian, did you guys make any money the last 12 years in your real estate?
A little bit, yeah.
Right. So, but yeah, he is right now, but his net worth is not comparable to many average Canadians in the Golden Horseshoe.
Well, here's the way I look at it, Erwin, is my ability to predict the economy, right, in the future is only slightly better than random chance. Okay? And I think anybody who thinks that they know the market well simply doesn't understand how complex the economic model really is. There are things, even macro economic trends that people try and read into can anticipate something like a pandemic, right? You knew that it might happen, but hell, the last major one we had was just over 100 years ago, right? Yep. So it's not something that you think about, right? The Ukrainian-Russian war, you don't anticipate this kind of stuff and what it might do. Maybe
tons of really expensive people didn't anticipate it.
Yeah, exactly. You might have been able to appreciate ESG policy impacts to the price of oil and the input cost towards inflation, maybe, right? But you didn't anticipate that Russia would turn off all the taps and accelerate that issue.
No, and when the head of CMHC gets the Canadian performance, the market performance wrong during the pandemic, then I mean, if the head of CMHC doesn't have the right data and can't put the right analysis together, then what are we doing, right?
Well, again, they got to think of agendas there, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
So
I think we're all talking about the same person. I'm pretty sure he was just trying to make a name for himself.
True. So we still have 3 more topics to cover, and we have 30 minutes left, less than, because we got to do the wrap up and hopefully have time for a couple of questions. So we're going to try and steam through this. I would like to encourage, if there's anywhere where we didn't go as deep and you guys have questions, Christian has a fantastic coaching practice in Ottawa, and he does an amazing job supporting clients in terms of their risk management and their analysis and growing their portfolio. Erwin also has, do you still have a few coaching spots open, Erwin? I know you were offering a few different things at Wealth Hackers. So can people reach out to you if they want more information?
It's really more of a strategic analysis session. It's not, I wouldn't call it coaching. To me, coaching is more for long-term relationship. That's not for me personally. Is you need someone who's strong at teaching versus I'm a shiny thing chaser.
And I just want to emphasize, Elizabeth, that I do a very limited amount of coaching. It's part of my giving back. My primary business is investing, right?
Absolutely.
So I want to be careful just in case 50 people decide that they want me to coach them. I can't handle that.
No, but you definitely, you do make time available to connect with people and help people, which I think is fantastic. You both give back a lot to the investment community, which we're very grateful for. So section 3 is vetting or analyzing the investment strategy, the property, and the exit plan. And this is huge because I see people out there who are like, oh, I'm a specialist in, say, for example, let's choose BRRRR or let's choose flipping. And the only exit plan they had was that the market was going to continue to go up and that they would just be able to turn around and sell or refinance the property for top dollar. They didn't have any plan for if the market went down, if they couldn't get the money back out that they needed, if they couldn't refinance for, 80% loan to, 125% of the deal. So we have to make sure, first of all, that the investment strategy matches the current market conditions. We want to make sure the property has good bones. I'm not a big fan of buying these, fixer-upper type properties that are literally falling down and need complete overhauls. And, you open up the walls or you open up the ceilings and uncover these like wild and crazy things. I want to be able to predict with a reasonable degree of accuracy any renovation costs at the beginning. We want to make sure that the repositioning plan and the numbers and timelines are realistic. And this is one of Christian's absolute strengths. Christian has, I think it's a 7-unit that you're repositioning into a 12-unit right now, Christian?
Yeah, that's one of the current projects right now. Yeah. Extra fun in this market.
Yeah, but making sure that that plan and the numbers and the timeline that we're working with are super realistic. I mean, we don't have control over how long it's going to take for, a change of zoning to wind its way through the process. And during the pandemic, everything slowed down. In the meantime, the cost of labor went up, the cost of materials went up, the holding costs have gone up in terms of utilities and insurance. So we have to make sure that we're being, or our potential partner or potential borrower are being super realistic with the numbers that we're utilizing. We always want to make sure we have, multiple exit strategies in place in addition to the main one. So when I'm looking at a deal, I expect to see, here's my main exit strategy, but here's plan B, plan C, and plan D. And then, oh, by the way, I also have the financing in place, or here's my financing. If we move to plan B, here's what's going to happen with your money. I'm always looking for those multiple ideas, multiple thoughts, multiple plans to ensure that, when we sign an agreement, that it's going to proceed according to plan.
Yeah.
Christian, did you want to jump in and add some information?
Well, I think that this is fantastic, right? So in any good business and any good project, you need a strategic view of what you're trying to accomplish. You need an operating plan. So how are you going to operate this? And you need a risk management plan to deal with the unexpected. And I think that's, you've basically nailed it here. So an operating plan includes your revenue profile, your expenses, the timelines associated with it, the cash flow management piece of it, including expenses such as staffing, contracts, etc., carrying costs, all of that. So you need your operation plan. But your risk management plan is going to, in the way that I kind of think through it, is what are the things that are going to keep you up at night, right? If something is keeping you up and you're worried about something, there's a risk there somewhere. So try and work it out, write it down. And literally, and I do this very regularly. I do this part of my annual planning that I do. I do this on my monthly updates that I do, and I do it whenever I'm not sleeping well. So if I wake up in the morning and I think, I wasn't sleeping well because I was worried about A, B, and C. Well, you know what? I'm going to write down A, B, and C, and I'm going to examine them. I'm going to figure out one, what would be the severity of this particular if this particular risk were to manifest. Is it going to be a minor issue or is it going to be a major issue? And then I'm going to ask what the probability is. So if it's something that's severe, right? If this risk were to happen, it's severe and it's highly probable. It's not part of your risk plan. It's part of your main plan. It's plan A. You got to deal with it. But if you've got something that would be maybe a medium severity, right? And it might be a medium probability of it happening. That's something you want, just a contingency plan. And a contingency plan, I usually have at least 2 levels of contingency, because even your first contingency plan may not work out. So you need another option to be able to deal with it. And I thought it was funny because I have a client that I've been coaching recently. They're quite advanced investors. They have a very big portfolio, and they've been wanting to learn how to do the operational management and risk management plan. And so he's just off to the US, and he was packing in his bag, and he texted me. He says, I think I'm getting it. I was packing my bag and thinking about what would be the impact if my checked luggage got lost, right? As he was assessing which things to put in his carry-on versus his checked luggage, right? And I thought that was hilarious. So
that's awesome. He is getting it too.
Yeah, it's funny, and these guys are great to work with. So
that's awesome. Erwin, anything to add before I jump to the next slide?
Just like Warren Buffett, I don't touch a property unless I have a plan for 10 years to hold it, even if it's a flip. So, for example, my client was flipping a property last year and it failed to sell, but because we followed a process, he was able to rent it out and actually cash flow a little bit. And now that the market's right, he's gonna flip it and he's gonna sell it now, make some profit, because we did things right.
Yeah.
I've been just doing this for so long. I've just been doing this for so long. I know what works.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like you said, that doing it right is because you're planning ahead. It's not being reactive. It's looking and anticipating the future.
Mhm. And it was
Love it.
it's a significant renovation. It was like over $130,000 spent in renovations, largely
Mhm.
cosmetic, nothing major. I also draw the line on like major foundation issues. That's where I draw the line. But almost everything else to me is fair game. Uh, Everything can be compensated by money, but yeah, certain things I draw a line. But in this market, totally different. Like there's so many opportunities coming. Be extremely picky.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so terms and conditions and security being offered. So this is something that, you know, you've sort of gotten to the point where you've looked at the opportunity, you've looked at the borrower, you've looked at the market, you've looked at the property. Now you're starting to drill down a little more specifically. This is usually deal specific. So the plan is, you know, what is going to happen with your money, whether you're coming in as a money partner and you're putting up the down payment and qualifying for the mortgage, or whether you're doing private lending and you're putting cash in. What are the repayment terms? Like, how are you getting your money back? What is the loan to value and how is that valuation being supported? So we know one of the major companies that went under earlier this year, one of the things was there seemed to be some irregularities or improprieties around how the valuation of the property was determined. So I typically like to see a couple of different ways to establish a loan to value. Like if you're telling me the property is worth 600,000, I'd like to see an appraisal, and then I'd like to see a tax assessment that puts the valuation of the property at like 550, because the tax assessed value, of course, is always lower. Or CMA, which is comparative market analysis done by a realtor, you know, an independent person. I want to be able to contact them. I feel like people, we have this tendency to trust, and we have this tendency in particular to trust people that other people seem to trust or that seem to be very popular on social media, and that makes us hesitant to do our own due diligence. Would that be accurate, Erwin? I see you smiling.
This slide is perfectly explains why I don't lend money. There's just so much here. I just rather own it. It's the same amount. Like to me, this all here is almost the same amount of work as just owning it yourself. So just own it.
Yeah. Although that being said, you do have equity loans that you do, right? Like you have a couple of companies that you've done your due diligence on,
Mhm.
and you do lend money in terms of, because I remember you and I have talked about it. So you would be looking at these things in terms of repayment, like what's the plan to get your money back? What kind of return are you going to be getting?
Mhm.
Those kinds of things.
Mhm. That is true. That is true. But the amounts are very, very tiny, right?
Mm, okay,
The money I've done equity deals on with developers, like that doesn't even total up to one down payment on a property, right?
gotcha.
I'm very controlling, as people can't tell.
Absolutely. Well,
My track record shows it. Why would I invest with someone else if my track record's so strong in making money for myself and my family?
yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so I want to make sure I'm named on property insurance. I want to know what the provisions are if the timelines need to be extended. And I want to know, like, I want some kind of plan if the borrower partner dies, disappears, or becomes incapacitated. A lot of us are hesitant to talk about, like, hey, you know, what happens if something happens to you as my partner or as my borrower? But it does happen. I mean, my husband's best friend was one of our early business partners, and he died unexpectedly at the age of 36. And we were fortunate. His widow was a very reasonable woman, and she trusted us to, you know, do what was best with these properties. But I mean, we didn't know what we didn't know. There were no JV agreements in place. There was nothing that said, here's what's going to happen if someone, like, who in their 30s goes, you know, what happens if you die? Because statistically, it's not very likely to happen. But in my experience, the best JV agreements have the provisions for what happens if things don't go well. Once you've had that conversation and everybody's on the same page, it increases the likelihood that things actually will go much more smoothly. Christian, you're
Mhm.
pondering.
No, no, I'm just thinking about value add here. So with your loan to value, I was thinking through. I mean, there's all kinds of great things. I mean, you're saying some amazing things here, right? And you're right. It's always a question of, you know, in a JV agreement, it's pretty much like a marriage, right? So, and some of these JV agreements can go on for quite a while. So you really better trust and like the other person. And it's like a marriage because there's a lot of money involved, right? And there's personalities involved.
You said it right there again. I don't need another marriage. just keep it in the family.
Yeah.
And that's one of the best parts of real estate, is that we get to pick and choose the situation that works for us. Like, Christian, you don't have a ton of joint venture partners either, do you?
I have zero.
Yeah.
So, I've got some clients that do partnerships, and I've seen a lot of ugly ones, right? I'm dealing with a client right now that didn't do their diligence on their partner. They just felt the partner was very enthusiastic, and had relied and expected that person had a lot of experience, only to dig in and find out that the other person was a bit of a nutcase, right? And now my client's been trying to extract themselves out of that particular agreement, and will ultimately exercise a shotgun clause in order to get out, right? But the other partner did so much damage to the situation that there's loss of equity and potential, a potential lawsuit if my client wanted to pursue it. It got really quite ugly. So yeah. So that's so to get back to your original question, though, in terms of ourselves, very much like Erwin, we made a conscious decision that we wanted to be in full control, and not to say you can't be in control when you have equity partners, but the other piece of it is I choose to be accountable to myself. I don't want to have to be accountable to others, because if something changes and conditions change, or I have a different priority within my portfolio now, I want the freedom to be able to easily maneuver to what makes sense for my business, right? Not an individual project. So, but that's the choice that I make. And, their partnerships, joint ventures, are great scaling techniques, right? But you have to, and so you could scale far faster than I have scaled through limited partnerships, GPLP structures, JVs, etc. But you have to be prepared for what that means and what it is, and do the diligence around it as well.
Yeah, I agree completely. Jennifer said in the comments, in some cities like Saskatoon, the value of the property for taxes is actually inflated and the owners pay tax on less. We lent less than the tax assessment, but the property was actually worth quite a bit less. Another know your market example. Yeah, and Jennifer, our goal today is not in any way, shape, or form to judge anyone. We've all three of us have lost money in real estate. We understand that it happens. Our goal is really just to share, like, based on the conversations we've had this year, based on our own business practices and what we know, how can we as investors level up and do a better job of protecting ourselves and the money that we've worked so hard for over the years. Yeah, there's absolutely no judgment here.
Yeah, no judgment, because I've lost money too. The project that we lost money on and my clients lost money on, the disclosure was not there. We were completely all lied to, and it just made no sense. I don't know what got into them, but that entire business just collapsed and took the entire family's everything with them. I believe they had 10 family members working in that business. Now all their jobs are gone too. All their savings and investment funds are gone. So I've just seen so much. I've seen so much losses. So I'm extremely, extremely picky.
Yeah. And I think that you raise a really good point there that we haven't really touched on, Erwin, but it's the importance of diversity. So I would be a joint venture partner in probably smaller towns, because, it's hard to make money investing in real estate in Toronto right now. But I love doing private lending in towns where I wouldn't be able to be an active investor, because then I get the stability and the security of investing in different market. Typically, it's going to be a larger and more stable market. So that diversity across the portfolio, I think, is really important as well. Donna says here she's taken the time to form relationships with all her JV partners in advance of investing. And that really, I find, is fundamentally the best way to invest. If you're going to choose partnerships, or if you're going to choose borrowers, I prefer, so in the slide I showed at the beginning with the kind of the 4 different ways to connect, I prefer to meet people, get to know people, understand people, their values, their ethics, the integrity, And then that's how I make the decision about whose deals I actually want to look at, because otherwise you could be completely inundated with deals.
Mhm.
And it's just overwhelming at this point. Oh,
So,
Barbara, you're so nice. She said this is by far the best meeting she's attended this year. Oh, you're most welcome.
Year's almost over too, so that's
yeah,
No,
that's
right?
quite a
That's it.
combination.
That says a lot. All right, so let's do our final slide because we have some questions. I'm hoping we get a couple of minutes to answer questions. So Christian, this slide was done with you in mind. So this is risk analysis. So this is based on your assessment of the previous considerations. How much risk do you believe is associated with this deal, whether it's a partnership or private lending? Are you and your life partner comfortable with this level of risk? I say life partner because in the event that you're going to lose money, there's going to be an impact on your life partner. In the event that things don't go according to plan and you are stressed out and anxious, there's going to be an impact on your life partner. What you do with money is going to determine whether you sleep or don't sleep at night and whether your partner sleeps or doesn't sleep at night. So one of my really big things that I work on with my clients is, where is your partner in all of this? And what do we need to do to create alignment between the two of you so that there is a level of comfort and trust? Anytime I'm looking at a deal, the final step for me is a gut check. And we as real estate investors spend a lot of time focusing on the numbers, the numbers, the numbers. But like Erwin said, if there is a red flag, do not ignore it. Do not ignore a red flag because I could make 15% on this. You're being offered 15% because the risk is high. So, or sorry, there's a good probability that you're being offered 15 or 17 or 18 or 20% because the risk is high. You need to decide if the risk outweighs the benefit for you. What happens to you if this money is lost? What are your legal options if the partner or borrower bails or goes under? So there again, the difference between lending on prom notes versus lending in first position on a mortgage. And do you have the knowledge and the support in order to complete the project if the partner or borrower disappears? So that's my sort of summary on risk analysis. Erwin, do you want to jump in and then we'll let Christian wrap it up?
excellent points. Especially when you're just talking about the rates, the first thing that came to mind is that folks need to understand when you look at the rate. My next question is, what would the smart money lend on this? Often the answer is no. So if someone's offering like 15, 18%, understand, like a good example that I don't know if I can name them. I think they're gone anyways, but fine, whatever. There was one large syndicated developer that was paying out 8% plus 2 or 4% bonus for every year you're into it, whatever, right? Understand that the smart money would want 30% return, right? So why would I take 8 to 12% return when the smart money wants 30%? So to me, no deal. So again,
Yeah.
diligence, context matters. I don't trust anyone. I'm not big on trusting other people with my money. I've way too much PTSD from people losing money, but I believe people need context on how people invest their money. For example, if you want to learn how people lend money, so you can't learn from me, learn from Elizabeth and Christian. What do they look for in a deal, right? How much risk are they willing to accept for a 15% return? Probably not much. So compare your deals to theirs, right? And I'll give an example. Here's some context. I got invited to this meeting at a lawyer's office, and it just so happened that lawyer does place money for private mortgages. I go, oh, that's cool. Like, can I send people your way? She goes, whoa, hang on. First off, you generally get to lend $1 million. So first off, the deal was she lends her clients have apartment buildings like 100 units at a time. And they need renovation money, right? Secured on 100 unit buildings. And her minimum investment is $500,000 if she likes you, right? Because as soon as she told me that there's her terms of the deals, like, this sounds really good. But then she's like, there's way too much money. I don't have that. I'll send you Elizabeth and Christian's phone numbers. But my point is, that's what great deals look like. Now compare your deal against that, right? Use that as a baseline to compare the deal that's in front of you compared to something like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely
That's
brilliant. Yeah. Because that's it exactly, right? So when you're doing a risk analysis, there's several elements to it, right? But the key thing that you're talking about, Erwin, is compensation relative to the risk. you don't necessarily, if somebody's going to offer you, a 15% return or an 8% return on something, and the risk is super low in your analysis, maybe that's right. It may still not meet your criteria for what you want to do, but it may be right. But that's the thing, right? Risk analysis sometimes means walking away, but if it means that you are comfortable that the risk is fine with you, then what's your compensation for it? So, and we talked about that earlier. The other thing too is, to just kind of dig in a little bit. So when we're doing the risk analysis, again, write down the things that you're concerned about. You're not going to get them all, right? So you do have to have a bucket, right? So, but you want to make sure you've got that list. You understand the severity, you understand the probability, what the contingency plan is. So that's absolutely key, and it has to be ingrained in your thinking in what you're doing, because stuff happens. It's just the way it is. And, I'll give an example that I think is probably very poignant to a lot of people on this call right now, is interest rates. So people were, saying at the beginning of the year, just stick with variable, right? Stick with variable because historically it's always cheaper than the fixed rates. And that's largely true, right? But there are points in time where that's not true. And there are, terms of time that are not, where that's not true. So then the next question is, if you're going to take variable, and so a fixed rate is just like an insurance premium. That's the way I look at it. I know exactly what I'm going to pay for, say, the next 5 years. So if you're taking a variable, then what's your contingency plan? Because there's a risk there. Interest rates may go up beyond what you thought. Do you have a plan B and a plan C? Can you cover that mortgage? And I think a lot of people weren't doing their risk management plan and now are feeling a little bit more distressed. But, so did you set up a reserve, okay, for that? I do. So if I take on some variable type of credit, I put first money in my reserve, and then I then use the savings and the cash flow from there. And that reserve is literally just there in order to be able to deal with an unexpected situation, such as, a higher borrowing cost, or an unexpected event, such as a roof collapsing onto you. So, and that stuff happens, as it turns out. So.
Unfortunately, it does sometimes. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I just want to be conscious of time. So should we go to questions, Elizabeth?
Well, we're kind of running short on time for questions. So here's what I think. So I know you need to jump, Christian. So I will do the quick wrap up. Erwin, if you want, if you have a couple of extra minutes and can stay, we'll do Q&A after we wrap up the webinar. And then we can include that in the recording or not, depending. But Christian, I know you need to go. So let's do the webinar wrap up. And then if Erwin has to go as well, then I can stay and just do a quick Q&A at the end. There's 4 questions right now.
Sure, and that's fine. So I'll just give the reason, and it's relevant to the topic here today. So the reason that I have to disappear at 1:30 is I've got 3 appraisals and 2 environmental assessments to do this afternoon. Why? Because even with interest rates as high as they are, I'm not shying away from it. This is kind of what I view as just sort of normal practice. I'm building capital reserves. Okay. Why am I building capital reserves? Well, I've got construction projects on the go, right? And I need to protect myself there. I have a business that if things get out of control from an economy perspective, I want to make sure I have good capital reserves. And if everything goes well over the next 2 years and I was worrying for nothing, then I've got large amounts of capital to deploy on the opportunities that may present itself. So, people wonder, why are you doing all this refi? The cost of capital is high. Yeah, but I've got certainty and I've got working capital to do stuff with. So to me, it's worth it. And so that's why I'm off.
Love it. And you don't need partners when you have your own capital.
That's true. It minimizes that risk too. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me today. The feedback already we're getting in the chat is that this was a super valuable conversation, and that unfortunately it's not talked about enough. But I think it's important that we continue to have some of these, more open, honest conversations for sure. Today we are giving away a book. We decided to pick Cherry Chan's book in honor of Erwin and Cherry. So let's see, Christian, before you go, what webinar attendee, give me a number between 1 and 100. That attendee number will be contacted by Mary Beth to send the book, Cherry's book, over.
37.
37. Okay, there you have it, Mary Beth. When you're watching the replay, number 37 is going to get Cherry's book. If you are new to my real estate community, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Everyone who registered to attend today will automatically get a copy of the recording of the webinar, but it will also be posted in a couple of weeks on my YouTube. And if you want to check back, Erwin and Christian have been my guests at other times, and they've always shared fantastic information and provided so much value for us in the real estate community. Here is where you can find each of us and contact us. Christian, thank you so much. I know you're a busy guy. We so appreciate your time. You as well, Erwin. I know you're just coming off Wealth Hacker, and I hope you caught up on some sleep since then, and you're feeling pretty good. But I know you're a busy guy too, so I'm really glad that we were able to spend this time together. And my next webinar that's coming up is going to be with high performance coach Andrew Skopik. So when Erwin said, ask who your coach's coach is, this is my high performance coach. He has been instrumental in my performance over the last few years. I think I've been very blessed to come through COVID with, I think I'm better than I was going in. So if you are looking for a total success blueprint, we're going to be talking about your action plan to winning all year. It's going to be a great way to end 2022 and kick off 2023. That's going to be Monday, December 12th at 7 p.m. Until 8:30. Hoping a whole lot of you can join us, and let's get 2023 off to an amazing start. Thank you so much, Christian. I know you need to jump. You go right ahead. Erwin, do you want to stay for a minute? There's 4 questions here we can tackle.
Sure. Happy to tackle them. And thank you, Elizabeth, for putting this on. The stuff isn't talked about nearly enough.
Oh, my pleasure. Oh, you're welcome, guys. Andrew is great. Yes, you are right. He is pretty fantastic. Okay. So Sam asked if we have specific resources, links, websites that we use to look up things like credit scores, background check, title search, and court filings. So in my world, your accountant, or not your accountant, your lawyer can do quite a few of these searches, like title searches, but you can use Nuance yourself. Is it Nuance? No. Who is it who you can go to do your own title search, Erwin?
Again, because this is not stuff that I do. I personally reach out to people I know that did business with. And like, I'll talk to their mortgage people. I'll talk to anybody. I don't. Yeah. Trust no one. Trust and verify.
Yeah.
Verify
exactly.
heavily.
Yeah, that's a very good point. ppsa.ca is where you can go and see if there are judgments or anything registered on a person or corporations on their personal property registry. So ppsa.ca, if there's a general securities agreement that's registered. If you go pull your own, it's always kind of fun. You should be able to see like any car financing or anything like that. You should be able to look up. I think Kelly mentioned earlier CBRE, I think she said, had some good resources. I like the CMHC portal in terms of where I go for information on real estate type things, but I find a lot of it is through my lawyer. So hopefully that answers your question, Sam. Barb said, would it be common practice to request a life insurance policy from the borrower in the amount that you are lending? Have you ever seen that before, Erwin? A life insurance policy?
No. Again, to give a context, if I'm putting money out, I only do registered investments, as in they're licensed under Ontario Securities Commission. So this is I don't need life insurance on a REIT.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something I've seen a lot of, Barb, to answer your question. I could see it making sense In a joint venture partnership, if we've got a lot of money on the table, I could definitely see that. They're called key holder policies typically, and you can get crossover ones. So you'd have a policy, there'd be a policy on you and a policy on your partner. So for large amounts of money, I could definitely see it. I think the cost of the insurance for smaller amounts or for private lending probably wouldn't make it worthwhile. I think most borrowers probably wouldn't pay it. But I mean, you should have other provisions in place in terms of how you're going to manage that if something happens to the borrower. Jennifer said, as a lender getting a deal, I think it's fantastic advice to ask about the operating and risk management plan. How many borrowers are equipped to provide this information to the lenders? Very few. The answer is very few. I was working with one of my clients last week, and I was showing her, when I have clients who are raising funds, this is at a minimum the package that they're going to put together. So they're going to put together a package that has multiple parts. The first thing it does is it has an investor bio. So that's information on the investor, what their experience is, what their background is, examples of previous deals they've done. So this is part one. Part two is information on the market, why they've chosen this market, what the benefits are, sort of a high level analysis of the market, what's going on with the rents, who the tenants are, those kinds of things. The third part of the package is the information on the actual deal itself. And it's, what is the exit strategy? What do the numbers look like? What's the plan? What are, plan B, C, and D? And when I showed that to my client, she was like, I've never seen this before. So I think a lot of people are very used to like, hey, here's an email or here's a PDF, it's a couple of pages, but they're not used to getting a lot of information. And as someone commented earlier, the one who has the gold makes the rules. So we as lenders have the opportunity to level up across the board and say, hey, I want to see a complete package on this opportunity. Like, I'm not going to be lending on a one-page palm note, and I'm not going to be lending on a one-page deal summary. I want to see more than that. So I don't think, unfortunately, a lot of borrowers are equipped to provide this information, but I think it's an opportunity for any borrowers, potential borrowers or partners who are listening. This would be a great plan to level up so that this is an area where you shine above, some of the other people that are out there doing business right now. Anything to add there, Erwin?
No, these questions are generally on lending. So again, I'm biased.
Okay. And the last one here, how is the risk level to invest on multifamily businesses using other people's money? So there's a lot of people out there right now, Erwin, who are raising capital to buy multifamily buildings. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, in general, because of the way the market is, I'm looking for upside. I'm not interested in cap returns. I'm interested in large upside. Like we're buying properties for 30% off the top at discounts from peak values. So again, that's my own bias. I'd rather have large equity gains than have cap returns. Also, I'm very hesitant to lend to anyone because I think there's a lot of operators out there who have no money. And so you could just be lending to someone who is drowning, right? So you may never see that money again.
Yeah, that's and that's, I always like to lend to people when I have a level of comfort that, if this deal isn't going according to plan, that they have other deals that could support it, and or they have a reputation so that their integrity might hold them accountable in a way that they wouldn't necessarily have to be in terms of commitment, right?
Right. But it didn't stop a lot of operators. They were just failing operators, right?
Yeah. And that's absolutely the challenge. You're absolutely right. Okay. Julia just added a comment. I've just been advised by my lawyer, primary beneficiary of the insurance for my borrow. It's an equity JV. Part of the rationale is my JV partner is on lots of deals, and I do not want to be in a lineup for getting my funds back if something happens. Yep, that absolutely makes sense, Julia. I wouldn't want to be in a lineup either. Okay, wonderful. So that is our questions. Anything that you have to add, Erwin? It's been such a pleasure having you. You look fantastic, by the way, considering you just had this like crazy event a week ago.
I think it's because I went to bed really early last night.
Uh, The sleep is agreeing with you.
I think again the overall thing is like this next 12 months or so, a lot of people are going to come out of this very, very successful. Just just be cautious of your money. The old rules apply. Don't lose money.
Yeah.
Just don't lose money, and that way you have capital to invest and take advantage of the opportunities coming.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a landslide of them for sure.
Yeah. I think Elizabeth and I have discussed it. I think this tip of the iceberg right now. I think there's a lot of bankruptcies coming. A lot of these coaching programs that are out there, like their coaches are bankrupt. So how are the practices they taught? So I'm keeping an eye on how their students are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's anything, if anybody is struggling, Erwin, I know you offer a fantastic strategy session. I know that I've spent a lot of time. I also do strategy sessions. And we've spent a lot of time, looking at people's portfolios and helping them find ways to kind of turn things around. And okay, we're struggling with cash flow. What can we do? How can we, who can we introduce you to? How can we support you? So if you're one of those, your 18th listeners here, Erwin.
Thank you, Barb.
If there's anything we can do to help you on your journey, we are more than honored to do that. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving us your time today. It's always a pleasure, and I hope I will see you on December 12th for my final webinar of the year. Take care, guys. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.